half of all mental health problems begin in childhood, before the age of 14. And one of the things we're looking at is how experiences of early adversity, such as domestic violence and maltreatment, can lead to changes in brain structure and function that can embed long-term vulnerability to mental health problems. It's something we're calling latent vulnerability. Those who had been exposed to maltreatment and domestic violence showed heightened patterns of activation in those brain regions related to threat vigilance and threat detection. And what was striking is that we see the same pattern in other studies done by other groups where they have looked at soldiers before and after combat. And that might help both the soldiers and the children function in those environments, but the difficulty is that it may also embed long-term vulnerability. We believe it is reversible. We know that many children who experience abuse and neglect and domestic violence have a resilient and positive outcome, and we expect that their brain will change and respond to positive emotional experiences such as social support and being in a secure and safe environment.
My mother and my brother were murdered in front of me. He put the gun to my head and he had me beg for my life. I was 10. I just turned 10.
It's hard to come out and say that I was a victim and that I was abused, especially when you're little, because it's like a big secret that's always on your back and that you never know when it's going to come out.
The image of my brother falling on that concrete floor and people stepping and just kicking with shoes on his face, I couldn't get that image out of my head.
Trauma is an overwhelming event. It takes away our safety, it creates a sense of helplessness, and it continues to affect our perception of our reality.
Some of the telltale signs of trauma are quite evident. Many of these symptoms, it's not that we don't see them, it's that we don't put together the entire sort of picture of what trauma is. Inability to sleep or interrupted sleep, inability to focus on what's going on, really not able to attend to learning. Adults need to be aware of children who are exposed to violence and intervene early and stop it.
I don't like the environment that I stay in. People getting killed every day, drug deals, people getting snatched, raped, cut up.
Whether it is a child who witnesses violence or a child who is the victim, you can't be fearful and be able to live your normal life. You have to be able to think clearly, and when you're traumatized, you can't do that.
Violence continues then to affect a child in their perception of their community, of their family, that danger is right around the corner. and the brain gets wired to expect danger.
My dad started actually physically beating me to the point to where I'd go to school covered in bruises. I don't know how many times I've been threatened to be killed by my own dad.
My brother got shot in the head. He didn't make it.
It makes you afraid at times. It makes you feel that, oh my God, you know what, I just lost a friend, I just lost a family member. It just makes you feel that, hey, I could die next, I could be the next one dead.
What trauma does is it triggers what's called the amygdala in the brain, which is our fight, flight, freeze center.
And it truly is a change in the brain and a change in the stress hormones that are flowing through the body.
All our brains have what we call alarm systems. Because the brain now has been wired for danger and it's triggered into this fight-flight, we don't just get over a traumatic event. It continues to impact us.
I started hearing my mom scream in the middle of the night. And it got to the point where he started beating me and my sisters. I let my anger build up, didn't talk to anybody about it.
When you hold everything aside, it's like a bomb and it's like you're ready to explode and just somebody push that last button.
Most kids who've experienced violence oftentimes have experienced multiple types of violence. In the kids we see, the average number of different types of violent trauma is 4. And so complex trauma then affects multiple areas of the brain because it's ongoing.
Maybe it's gang warfare, maybe it's drug use and abuse in the family, maybe it's domestic violence, maybe it's bullying at school. And if there is a layering effect of cumulative violence, it changes literally the DNA.
It all started off with the hugging game. He would take us into his room. We would sit on his lap and he would hug us, and we weren't supposed to tell anyone.
When I was 5, I would have to leave kindergarten class and go home and have sex with this man who was in his 50s. I remember the long walk home and crying and falling down and having to get back up and walking on.
Child sexual abuse exists in the neighborhood, exists unfortunately at our schools, at our churches, at our homes, everywhere. And there are children out there suffering.
My first assault was in high school. I met a guy at a church and he wanted to be my friend. I thought it'd be great. And instead he assaulted me and I felt very scared.
When you have a child that doesn't get to work through that abuse in an appropriate manner, that abuse doesn't go away. It lives in that child.
Exposure to violence in childhood has been found to be associated with a really unbelievable range of long-term impacts.
Very young children who are exposed to violence many times have difficulty in establishing a trusting relationship. These children have fears.
You're twice as likely to develop depression. You're probably 3 times as likely to develop some type of anxiety disorder.
As they move into school age, they may have very, very serious behavior problems. As we look at adolescence, we see children running away. Sometimes children may be involved in the juvenile justice system, which puts the child at risk for being an adult offender. And so the cost of violence is staggering.
I felt isolated. Nobody knew what I was going through. To go 3 years without talking about it, I imploded.
Finally, after stressing and keeping everything bottled up and everything building up, I just finally broke down one day and attempted suicide.
Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death of children and adolescents in this country. We always ask in every case, what role might child abuse have played?
My mother, she knew that stuff was going on, but it just seemed like she didn't really care. She never stopped that abuse. And to this day, I've never forgotten what some of my family members have done to me.
These are traumatized kids. And so how do we then, as adults, professionals, caregivers, put a system around children that really is trauma-informed?
Happy feeling. Good job. Okay? So I want
What do we do differently to help rewire their brain? And then ultimately, how do we build capacity in order to really help our kids?
Everybody come together, whether it's in the community, in the home, in the school, wherever children are, and child by child, think of ways in which we can intervene early and educate people about what children need in order to grow, to thrive, and to continue to be resilient human beings.
Hello and welcome to this special interview on post-traumatic stress disorder in children, sponsored by the Anxiety Disorders Association of British Columbia. I'm Dr. Michael Catchpole, and my guest is Dr. John Walker. Dr. Walker is a clinical psychologist and director of the Stress and Anxiety Program at St. Boniface Hospital. Dr. Walker, thanks so much for being here. Dr. Walker, can we talk a bit about precipitating events for post-traumatic stress disorder in children? I think a lot of people have heard about this resulting from war in adults and so on, and maybe for kids as well. But could you talk a bit about what kinds of things can trigger PTSD in children?
Well, traumatic events are actually common over the years in everyone's life. So common events we see in children are being involved in a motor vehicle accident, having a death in the family like a parent, witnessing a bad car accident, and even unfortunate things like family violence, physical and sexual abuse. So there's a whole range of different situations that can trigger problems with PTSD.
Now, any of those events might stimulate a stress reaction in a child, which may or may not resolve. When does it become post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, anyone is sort of upset after a stressful event, so that's a normal response. In most people, adults and children, the stress settles down over the days. In a smaller proportion of people, they continue to feel very upset afterwards, and often you see signs like sleep disturbance, distractibility, poor concentration, and someone having difficulty following their normal routine. And if that happens, that's the time it takes some extra attention for sure.
What about nightmares, flashbacks, that kind of thing? Is that part of the pattern in children?
Absolutely. Upsetting dreams, nightmares, intrusive memories are very common in children.
Okay. Now let's talk about some home management strategies. What sort of things can a parent or caregiver do to help a child who's been through this sort of thing?
I think the most basic important approach is to be a really good listener, to be an active listener to your child. So to allow your child to talk about the events, how they feel about afterwards, and to really accept your child's feelings and not try to minimize them.
That can probably be hard for the parents sometimes too, though, to listen, right? Isn't that activating for the parent as well?
Absolutely. So this is a challenge we all face, that the parent may have gone through the same trauma, and allowing the child to talk about it may get them remembering about it. So it's useful to do even though it's difficult.
I think that's a key point. Even though it's difficult, it's the right thing to do. Can you talk a little more about other home management strategies? What else can the parent do to help a child?
Well, a key thing actually is helping the child return to their normal activities after an upsetting event. So even after something as upsetting as the death of a parent, most children will return to school after a few days. And returning to school and normal activities is part of the recovery process, really helps people.
Very interesting. Other home management approaches one could take to help a child?
Really, we need to realize that when someone's gone through a traumatic event like this, discussing it once isn't often enough. So allowing a child, as they're ready, chances to talk about it, listening to them when they want to talk about it, and really creating an open atmosphere that way really helps.
And maybe even revisiting it at different developmental stages, yes?
Absolutely, absolutely. Often it'll come up now. It may come up again when there's another death in the family, so allowing a child to talk about it that way. Another thing I shouldn't forget is avoidance. So, for example, if a child's been in a motor vehicle accident, they may be very reluctant afterwards to go in a car or go in a car on a highway. And it's very important for us to encourage the child to get back to every normal activity, including driving in a car.
So even though we might want to be protective, in fact, protective is really the opposite of what one's trying to do. One's trying to engage in exposure, really.
Exactly. So taking that approach in a supportive way and an understanding way, supporting your child to gradually resume their normal activities, encouraging them to face situations that are upsetting because of memories, and doing that on a step-by-step basis.
And also for young children, maybe drawing. Little kids often express feelings via drawing. Would that be relevant?
Any way of exploring it. So drawing is very, very helpful with children. Is drawing a story about what happened in the car accident, or remembering and seeing pictures of a grandparent who's died recently.
Good tips. Dr. Walker, thank you so much. My guest has been Dr. John Walker, clinical psychologist from St. Boniface Hospital.